Book 5, Salem. Safety Assured, Leaving East of Medicetti. Chapter 25. No, Grampy. Mari was in a deep sleep when she felt a presence hovering over her. She opened her eyes and gasped. "Oh, good, you're awake," Dex said in a low voice, uncomfortable to be in his in-laws' bedroom. "It's Jatesy. She thinks the baby's coming, but she's not sure. She wants you to come over so I can get Mrs. Braxig's." Perrin mumbled into his pillow as Deck dashed out the door. "Did Deck hit his head again?" "No," Mari said, quickly getting up. "It's Jatesy." "Jatesy hit her head?" Mari put her lips next to his ear. "No, Grampy." Perrin's eyes opened at that. "Finally?" "Maybe," Mari said, dressing hastily. She glanced out the window. It was still dark, but dawn would be coming soon. "Come over later to find out. I might not be able to leave." "I'm not catching anything wet and slippery." "Trust me, no one wants you to." She jogged over to the Brighters and opened the door just as Deck was coming out to retrieve Clark. "If this isn't the real thing, I don't want to be around when it is." Mari found Jatesy sitting on the sofa, momentarily fine. "It's Shem and Calla's doing," she said. "The baby's always most active when Shem's around, but last night it could barely move when he put his hand on my belly. Calla rubbed her hands, put them on my belly next to his, and said, 'Time to come out, little one.' She said she does that for her sisters when they're expecting, and if it's a girl, it's born by the next day. Boys take another week before they come." Jatesy started to laugh, but her face contorted as a wave of pain overcame her. Mari nodded encouragingly as Jatesy breathed through it. "Worse than when we were in Edge?" "Much," she gasped. "Good!" "Must also mean it's a girl," Jatesy said when she could speak again. "Deck's little insulter is coming to live with us today." She struggled to get to her feet. "What's the date? The 59th day? I guess you were right. It's about 4 weeks later than when I last thought I was ready to birth." She winced and held her back. "Well, today's the day. Let's take a walk, watch the sunrise, make Father nervous, and scare Pato. Maybe we can even make Deck lose consciousness over and over again. Full day ahead of us, so I hope you're ready, Mother." Mari whimpered. There was no place she would rather be. Salem was filled with people who knew all about birthing babies. Perrin looked out at the side window over to the Brighters' house. The midwife had arrived on horseback and had not left. That was half an hour ago. Deck hadn't come out of the house either. The sun was starting to rise and the cattle would need attending to. That's why Pato was drooling sleepily through his breakfast. As much as Perrin wanted to know what was going on, he also didn't want to. For a man so accustomed to bloodshed, the idea of being within earshot of his daughter birthing was quite unnerving. He couldn't imagine how Deck was taking it, and that's who he was most worried about. Everyone had come to Salem and found family except for Deck at Brighter. He had no blood relatives anywhere, according to the few names he knew and the records they could find. All he had in Salem was his wife and her family, and by association, Perrin reminded him, their very extensive family as well. Still, that didn't replace Deck not having a father to support him on a day like this. Perrin knew what he needed to do this morning, but it was more unpleasant than the idea of saluting Lemuel Thorne. He put down his mug and nudged Pato awake again. "I'm going over there. Deck may need holding up, I don't know. You get to the cattle, all right? Maybe find a Zenas or two to help you. If you don't, I'll have you trade me places." Pato pried open his eyes with his fingers. I'm going. Perrin took a deep breath and walked the very short distance to the Brighters. He gritted his teeth, waiting to hear terrifying screams or blood-curdling shouts as he approached the front steps. Instead, all he found was Deck opening the door. "I just need a little air. That's all she said I needed." "Let's take a walk," Perrin suggested. "Give you some time." "Oh, there's no time." A woman older than Mari appeared by Deck's side. "Jatsy's progressing quite nicely." Perrin squinted. She seemed familiar, but he couldn't place her. "But Mari took nearly a full day to birth her babies." "Every woman is different, Mr. Shin. By midday meal, you'll have held the baby, announced the arrival, and planted an acre of corn." Suddenly, Perrin knew, and his breathing quickened as panic rose in his chest. "Edge! I saw you in Edge!" The world had felt so far away, and now, suddenly, here it was talking to him. "Yes, you did, briefly. I'm Mrs. Braxhicks. I just returned last week, Colonel." She shook her head. "I'm sorry. Mr. Shin, or rather General Shin. I was in Idemia for retraining when your family vanished. Imagine my surprise when I returned to check on Jatsy and instead found soldiers rummaging through the house." Out of the corner of her eye, she spied Deck, sagging. With a brawny arm, she grabbed his collar, pulled him upright, and propped him against the doorframe. "Stay with us, Deckett. That Genev is a real beast, I'm telling you," she said to Perrin, not missing a beat. "He was stopping people and grilling them on what they knew. I'd received a message that I would be escorted to the fort the next morning to meet with the administrator of loyalty. I can't tell you how thrilled I was when Jothan came to take me home the night before." Perrin relaxed until he remembered something. "So you heard the official story, then?" "Yes, I did," she said soberly, but the corners of her mouth began to twitch. "And I have to confess that as I stood at that message board reading it, I started laughing so hard that people asked if I was all right. What a fabulous piece of fiction! Of course, I knew then that your entire family was safely here. Why else would they create such a tale? My inappropriate outburst was probably why Genev wanted to question me." Perrin smiled. "Do you know what others thought of the story?" "No, sir, I don't. Doesn't matter now, though, does it?" "No, not at all," Perrin said. He could see why she'd been allowed to go into the world. For a Salemite, she was a decent liar. Mrs. Braxhecks turned to Deck. "Enough fresh air? Good." "I can't do this," Deck said to Perrin. "I mean, Mrs. Braxhecks has been preparing me, explaining things. The other day, she even drew diagrams." He winced. Mrs. Braxhicks smiled proudly. "But it's not like cattle at all," Deck trembled. "It's my wife, your daughter. You should see what she's going through." "He can if he wants to, and Jatsy doesn't mind." Mrs. Braxhicks nodded at Perrin. "Often maternal grandfathers assist, and I still have the diagrams." Perrin's eyes doubled in size. "How could I ever suggest we have more children seeing what's happening to her?" Deck said miserably. The midwife turned to him and held him firmly by the shoulders. "As enormous as the pain is now, much of it will be forgiven and forgotten as she holds that baby. There's no great reward without a great sacrifice. It will be worth it, a dozen times over even. What she needs most of all now is you." Deck was ashen. "There is strength in a man that every woman yearns for," Mrs. Braxhicks told him, "and that every baby needs." From upstairs, Mari's voice traveled down, slightly panicked. "Mrs. Braxhicks, Jatsy says she feels nauseated." "That's what we've been waiting for," Mrs. Braxhicks said. She turned to the stairs and called, "Be right up. Jatsy knows what to do. Give her the bucket and tell her to pant." "There's no strength in me right now," Deck's voice quavered. "I promise you." "Yes, there is, Deckett," the midwife told him. "She'll need your strength to help her find hers. Newborns behave differently in the arms of their fathers. They feel protected and secure. While a mother prepares a child to enter the world, a father gives him the courage to actually face it, starting today. Let's go be a father, Deck. Besides, someone needs to hold the newborn while we take care of her mother afterward." She tugged on his arm and led the stunned, almost father back into the house. Perrin sat down hard on the steps of the front porch and held his head in his hands. The sun slowly crept over the mountains, but Perrin didn't watch it. He just stared at the steps and slowly rocked, praying everything would go all right as he felt the minutes, maybe even an hour, pass. At one point, he heard Mrs. Braxick's voice come muffled to his ears, saying, "Push, push, push." He also heard a long, grunting noise that would have been very loud upstairs in the bedroom. He pressed his hands to his head and waited to hear the thudding of deck hitting the floor, or Mari. But the loud wail that reached his ears instead was chilling. His daughter. He rubbed his forehead furiously, trying to ease the sound of her in agony, but it was no use. Some sounds are never forgotten. Jatesy wailed again, this time longer, permanently sealing the horrible cry in Perrin's mind. There was nothing he could do to help her. Nothing. Perrin rocked harder. Another wail, this time fainter and higher pitched, came to him. It was also unmistakable. He stopped rubbing his head and looked up. He glanced at the sun that now hovered fully over the tall peaks and wiped away the wetness that was falling from his eyes. He stood up, turned to the door, stared at it for a moment, then walked into the house. Grandfather Shin, no, much too formal. Grandpa Perrin, no, closer, but not quite. Certainly not Grampy. Whoever he was now had someone to meet. He tiptoed through the gathering room, listening for anything that might suggest everything hadn't gone as it should. But soon he heard the distinctive giggle of his daughter. Just moments ago, it was a soul-racking cry that ripped through his heart. And now she was giggling? He heard his name mentioned, and a moment later, Mari was coming down the stairs. "You're here!" Perrin nodded. "For how long?" "Long enough." "You're a little pale," Mari said. "So are you." "I know," she laughed shakily. "I didn't think I'd make it. Thank goodness the baby came so quickly, or I would have been flat on the floor, and Jatesy would have had to hold her own hand." "Everyone all right? So how was it?" "Amazing. You have to come see," she said, reaching for his arm. "Now?" "Jatesy's insisting. We've already moved her to the bed. She wants you to hold the baby." Mari's eyes filled with tears as she pulled him up the stairs and into Deck and Jatesy's bedroom. Perrin tried to ignore the bloody cloths Mrs. Braxick was putting into a bag, but his eyes lingered on the considerable mess until his daughter called to him. "Come meet your granddaughter, Salema." Perrin shifted his gaze from the bag to his daughter, sitting partly upright in bed under a blanket, with Deck sitting next to her. They were both contentedly gazing at the tightly wrapped package of blankets in Deck's arms. Jatesy beamed at her father. She looked exhausted but ready to climb a mountain if someone dared her. Mari whispered into Perrin's ear, "She's still a bit messy from the birth. You didn't see our babies until they were cleaned up. Just look beyond the clumps and smears." Perrin did his best not to cringe, but walked quietly over to the bed, expecting the worst. "Just for a few minutes," Mrs. Braxick said. "We're not exactly finished here yet." Perrin nodded as he leaned over to look into Deck's arms. Deck sat up in surprisingly good color and held up the bundle. "Take her," he whispered. "If you're holding the baby, you don't have to dance, right?" Perrin smiled and took the tiny package. She didn't look so bad. Not worse than any soldier after a battle, and that's what she had just gone through, a battle. Mari leaned against him as he cradled the newborn. "She's so quiet," Perrin said softly, concerned. "One yell was all she needed, and then she settled right down. Must be a brighter trait," Mari suggested. "I don't remember them being so small," he whispered. "They make them smaller now," she told him. Perrin chuckled. The baby opened her eyes at the deep noise and tried to focus on him. Her little lips parted as she searched his face. As she worked her new muscles, one of her eyebrows arched. Perrin sighed. She could call him anything she wanted, even Colonel Cuddly. By midday meal, Perrin hadn't planted an acre of corn, but he had figured out, in the future, how everyone in Salem would know a baby had arrived. Among the many banners he was designing, one would be pink-striped, like Heisemum had made him years ago in Edge. The dozens of towers which would be positioned throughout Salem could fly the banner as a signal that a baby had been born in the neighborhood. Message boards at the base of the towers could provide the details, the kind which Perrin was on his way to deliver right now to Guide Gleese. Gleese wanted daily reports of Salem's comings and goings, as he put it. At the Gleeses' front porch, Perrin found 3 more new grandfathers. It was a pleasure to swap stories with them, a fraternity he was now the newest member of. It was more gratifying than exchanging battle tales with other commanders, and although there was as much blood and yelling, the outcomes were far happier. One man was bringing Guide Gleese news of his 78th grandchild, and he easily recited the names and ages of every last one. "My own army, General Shin," the elderly man smiled at him. "Glad to hear you've begun your own." Back at the Brighters, Mari was serving as messenger, gatekeeper, and proud grandmother. Grandmama, well, something. By afternoon, the food and supplies began to arrive, filling the spacious kitchen and eating room with promises that meals would keep coming for several weeks. Mari had a speech she recited for women who came by, providing the details of the birthing and her new granddaughter in a 1-minute presentation, which she delighted to repeat to Zenith's women and their neighbors. During a lull, Mari looked at the table full of food, blankets, and clothes and whispered, "Just like Edge used to be, but better." "So that's where you've been hiding." Deck chuckled as he found his brother-in-law pitching hay in the barn. "You've moved enough for 4 days. It's time to quit." "School doesn't start for another hour," Pato said, not looking up. "True, but it's time for me to get something to eat, which means it's time for you to keep your sister company for a few minutes, and to meet your new niece." Don't worry, she's all cleaned up and wrapped up in blankets. Nothing will squirt at you. Come on, Uncle Pato. It's your Salem duty, you know." Grumbling, Pato followed a chuckling Deck to his house, washed his hands, and trudged up the stairs, while Deck chatted with more squealing women. "Pato!" his sister cried, albeit quietly, and gestured for him to sit down next to her on the bed. "You're going to hold her. Come on, Salem tradition." And she placed the tightly wrapped bundle in his rigid arms. He gulped. "I don't know how to do this." "And I've had lots of experience," Jatesy chuckled. "We're all figuring it out together." "Am I doing this right?" Pato said stiffly. "Just support her head and let her snuggle in," Jatesy showed him, shifting the newborn in his arms. "I'm not the snuggly type," Pato said, trying to position the baby closer to him. "You will be when it's yours." Strangely, Pato didn't find himself disagreeing with that idea, but instead did his best to cuddle Salima. Jatesy nudged him. "Sniff her." "What?" "Her head. Sniff it. Trust me, she smells really sweet." Pato shrugged and sniffed her. "Maybe that's what the soap up in Paradise smells like. Scrubbed her up before they sent her down?" Jatesy smoothed the baby's thick black hair. "It's just like silk." "Looks like father's hair, doesn't it?" Pato said as he tried smoothing it himself. "Just needs touches of gray here and there." Jatesy giggled. "But she yelled like mother." "Like you then," Pato said. "But I think she has cow eyes." Jatesy looked at him. "How do you know about cow eyes?" "I did my share of spying on you and Deck. Mother said it's too early to tell, but I think those gray eyes are going to go big and light brown like Dex. Mark my words. How would you know? How many newborns have you seen? Might as well start now making predictions about all of your children. Don't talk to me about another baby yet. Pato smiled. So how many do you think you and Dec will have now that there are no limits? Jatesy shrugged. All my life, I knew I could have only 2 children. Just weeks ago, I learned I could have as many as I wanted. That's a little hard to imagine, especially having just gone through the process. But we've talked about it a few times, maybe having 6 or even 8 children. Pato blinked rapidly. Really? Jatesy smiled shyly. I love watching the Zenas family. There's so much life and fun and noise. Can you imagine the volume of our family if there were half a dozen of you and me? Wouldn't it have been fun? Are you serious? Pato stared at her. I am, said Jatesy soberly. All right, I admit there also would have been a lot more arguing and more chaos, but Pato, I know you can't imagine it right now, but however many children the Creator wants to send us, I want to try to take. He'll make us strong enough for whatever he sends. She ran her finger over Selima's small ones. At one point, when I was trying to push her out, I really panicked, she said quietly. I was so scared, I knew I couldn't do it. I imagined myself dying right here and wished that I could just to end the agony. But then suddenly I knew I could push her out. I had to do it. Not for me, for her, for those who follow her. Oh, I wish you could understand. The whole world is different today. Pato watched her carefully. Now wasn't the time for a smart remark. Jatesy wasn't quite herself anymore because something weird and motherly had happened to her. You should envy me, Pato, his sister declared. I was sure I would die, but instead, I made a new person. Isn't she incredible? Oh, I feel like I can do anything today. Why, I could march back into the world and take it over, she exclaimed. But then she fell back into the pillows which propped her up. After I have a very long nap, which I understand won't happen for a very long time. Maybe the Creator designed it that way, so that all new mothers wouldn't be trying to take over the world. Instead of staring at the strange creature which had taken over his sister, Pato looked back at the baby, who was now opening her mouth and craning her neck. I think she wants to go fishing. She's got a trout mouth. And I hope you take her someday. But actually that means she's hungry, that I'm not about to get that nap yet, and that it's your signal to leave for a while. Absolutely, Pato said, gingerly handing Selima back to Jatesy. He stood up and watched her fix the baby's blankets. Best thing you ever baked, Jates. I think you should really shock our parents and make it an even dozen of those. Thanks, Uncle Pato. Jatesy grinned as Pato left. Only if he has a dozen as well, she whispered to her daughter. It was Shem's reaction everyone was waiting for, and mother, father, grandparents, and uncle were all there as Shem and Kella arrived in the late afternoon to meet Selima. Mari wished Davinch could have dropped by just to sketch the scene. Kella emitted a tiny squeal as she sat down on the edge of Jatesy's bed. It worked again! It's a girl! I have some of nature's power. I just know I do. Can I see her toes, please? I love newborn toes. Of course. Jatesy pulled a tiny foot out from under the blanket. Look at the nails, Kella whispered in awe. Hardly visible. Oh, Shem, come look at these little things. They're miraculous. But Shem just stood at the door, his chin trembling as he watched his future bride holding the newborn's foot. Kella noticed. Isn't he adorable? She said to Mari. Mari nodded. And sweet. I always thought so. Perrin scowled. "He is adorable," Calla said firmly to Perrin, demonstrating considerable bravery in light of his continued frown. She stood up, took Shem by the hand, and pulled him over to the bed. He sat down and took Selima's tiny foot in his big hands. "You did it, Jates," he whispered. "I'm so proud of you." "I want you to hold her, Uncle Shem. You did so much for us as well." She passed the baby over to Shem, who took her expertly, despite the tears in his eyes. "Welcome to Salem, Selima," he said, holding her up to get a good view. "I hope you never see Edge." "Yes, Selima is a much better name than Edgia," Pato decided. "Dec and I decided we want our firstborn to be named after Salem," Jatesy explained. "Shem, we liked how your father incorporated it into your name." "I love Selima," Shem said. To the baby, whose eyes were open but hazy, he said, "A lot of people worked very hard to get you out of Edge. Your mama the most." He kissed Selima's cheek. "Shem, please don't drown my daughter," Dec said as the tears trickled down Shem's face. "Dec's daughter," Shem sighed as he tucked the newborn close to him. "Decet has a daughter. Doesn't that sound great?" "Yes, it does," Dec smiled. "And Perrin's your grandfather. What are we calling you?" Shem asked him. "Perrin." "I mean Selima," Shem clarified. "She's not going to walk up to you and say, 'Perrin, I need a kitten.'" "Sure she will. Why not?" he said, folding his arms. Jatesy turned to him. "Because you're a grandfather. Selima's not going to go to her grandmother and say, 'Mari, make Perrin get me a kitten.'" Mari put on a thoughtful face. "Well, why not?" "Because it's not right." "According to who?" Mari said. "Those titles, are they rules or just customs? We can change customs and rules." Perrin smiled appreciatively at his wife. "Oh, not again." Pato sat down on the floor. "Get comfortable, Calla. Mother's on one again. I haven't seen that look on her face since we got here. Must have been building up." "I think she has a point," Calla said. "Why not do what's best for your own family? That is Salem's way, after all. Maybe she just doesn't like the idea of being a grandma." "Oh, she likes the idea of being grand, all right," Pato assured. Mari went pink as Calla laughed. "It's just the feel of the word, grandmother," Mari said with a dramatic flair. "Grandfather," she tried again, and Perrin shuddered at her pronunciation. "We're just not old enough to be grandmother and grandfather," Perrin said, and immediately pointed a warning finger at Pato. "So choose your own titles," Calla said. "Come up with your own nicknames or whatever. Was there anything they called you in Edge that might be appropriate?" Mari smirked. "Colonel Cuddly comes to mind." Perrin jabbed her. Shem smiled. "General Giggles? I think that was my suggestion." "Definitely not Sergeant Major Sniffles," Perrin said. "Now that has potential. Uncle Sniffles." Pato pointed at Shem. Shem sniffled on cue and laughed softly as he rocked Selima. "Sergeant Major of Snuggles," Calla whispered, but not quietly enough. Immediately she turned red when she realized her mistake. "Really?" Perrin said, scowling. "I'll have to remember that." Calla looked apologetically at Shem, but he just winked at her. "Mama Mari," Dec suggested. "What?" Perrin turned to him. "Mama Mari, wouldn't that work?" Mari bounced her head back and forth. "Maybe, maybe. So what's Perrin?" Dec smiled. "Papa Perrin?" Perrin held up his hands and shivered. "Let's just leave it at Mari and Perrin for now. When Selima's big enough, she can give us her own designations. Then the next baby can give us different titles if he wishes, and so on. You could end up with a dozen names, Shem pointed out. So? Mari nodded. I agree. Let the babies name us. Pop Pop Perrin, Kala offered. Her smile faded quickly as Perrin glared at her. You're forgiven, Kala, Perrin assured her. After all, you gave me Sergeant Major of Snuggles to hold over his head. It was late in the evening, but Salima's parents had no comprehension of time. They were on the baby clock, and Salima wouldn't understand the motions of the sun and what it meant to the rest of the world for a while. The new parents laid on their bed in a foggy bliss. Last night, 2 of them went wearily to bed after the big family dinner, and now tonight 3 of them lay in utter exhaustion, with unconscious smiles on their faces. Is it time for bed yet? Jatsi asked Dek, whose eyes were closed. His daughter slept peacefully on his chest. Mrs. Braxhicks said she'd be by again at bedtime. Doesn't matter. We're already here. Let's just close our eyes. Wait, I think my eyes are closed, aren't they? Jatsi giggled and rolled slightly to watch her husband run a finger down their daughter's back. I can't believe she's finally here. Oh, I believe it, Dek exclaimed. I saw her come. If you need any reminders, I can give you plenty. Not like I can forget any of that anytime soon. At least I didn't have to do any reaching. By the way, happy anniversary. What are you talking about? We had our first anniversary weeks ago. The anniversary of when we first met, Dek clarified. It was 2 years ago that you showed up at my parents' kitchen door with a basket of food from your mother. Jatsi thought about that. Are you sure? When I arrived that day at my parents' place after burying them, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't even think of a good reason to continue. I had no hope, no purpose. Then you showed up at the door. Now I have a wife, a big house, my own herd, and a daughter. I was right. Nothing is the same. It's better. Oh, Dek, that's really today? Dek sighed. Actually, no. It's probably not for another 9 or 10 weeks yet. I just figured we'd be too busy to remember it then, so I brought it up now. Still a good story, right? Jatsi snuggled into her husband. The day I learned your parents had died, I told my mother it wasn't fair. I went on and on about everyone who had died. She said that someday all of it would make sense, and that every story has a happy ending. I just had to wait long enough for it. So, are you happy today? Completely. There you are. Captain Thorne bristled when he heard the sneering voice, and he closed his eyes. He wouldn't be out of pain for a while yet. Sitting on a bunk in the surgery wing, he took a deep breath and waited for the throbbing in his right arm to ease. I still don't understand why you just don't have the surgeon cut that hideous thing off, Commandant Genev hissed. And look at me when I address you, Captain. He opened his eyes as slowly as he dared to give Genev his coldest glare. I want to keep it, he said steadily, to remember. Genev scoffed. Remember what, Captain? Your failure, your ineptness. The surgeon says he can amputate. No! Lemuel bellowed. He was always brashest before the next dosage of pain mixture took effect. I refuse to go through life as an incomplete man. So you'd rather everyone sees you as an impotent man? You can get rid of that pain and get rid of that stench, too. His lip curled as he stared at the captain's dying arm. Lemuel was sliding a glove over the shriveled hand. Oh, yes, the glove, Genev said. That makes everything look normal again. No one can tell or smell. The smell is easing. Once it's completely, Lemuel couldn't bring himself to say the word dead in reference to his arm. There should be nothing left to draw attention to it. Except that it never moves unless someone bumps into it. Lemuel seethed with fury. Commandant Genève took sinister delight in daily tormenting him. Is there something you require, Commandant? The captain said coolly. The throbbing was beginning to subside, promising another few hours of reprieve. I'm not on duty for another half hour. Genève clasped his hands behind his back. Yes, there is. I want to know why you destroyed the message from your father insisting that you be reposted to the garrison in Idumea. Lemuel clenched his jaw. Because, as you are fully aware, Genève batted his eyelids annoyingly, I am the commander of this fort. All requests and communication from anyone to anyone pass by my desk first. The communication was between my father and me, said Lemuel flatly. Genève ignored that. The response you sent out this morning was, I am staying in Edge. Why? Lemuel swallowed hard. Surely you don't prefer Edge over serving with your own father now, do you? The High General requests you to be by his side and you turn him down? Lemuel stared into Genève's eyes. If he could block this roach of a man from reading him, he could block anyone, especially his father. I have yet to conquer the forest, Commandant. I promised myself I would remain here until I found the garters, until I destroyed those who stole away my Jatsi. Genève's short bark of laughter stopped him. She's gone, Captain. Forever. She was killed by the garters, remember? She wasn't with them, Lemuel whispered, making sure his eyes were still hard as stone. It was just the shins and brighter. No one saw Jatsi. She may still be out there. Her corpse rotting as disgustingly as your arm, Captain. Onions. The man always ate far too many onions, Lemuel thought. Talk about a stench. Until I have proof, I refuse to believe that. Genève got right up into his face, his midday meal nearly overpowering him. You better believe, Captain, the entire world does. They have all mourned the tragic deaths of Perrin, Jatsi, and Pedo Shin. They've wept over the loss of the grandchild that never took a breath. They're dealing with the knowledge that the Shin family is forever and completely gone. Now, if the entire world can accept that truth, why can't you? Because it's not the truth, Lemuel wanted to scream. If only he were stronger, more able to ride, less needy of the surgeon's mixtures that kept him going each day, he would have been back on his horse streak and in that forest finding her. Almost, Lemuel convinced himself that they all died in the forest. Almost he believed the story that Chairman Mel had published to the world. But when he believed it, he'd have to accept that Jatsi had died too. As much as his mind was willing to embrace the new truth that allowed Lemuel to be a hero because he destroyed the traitor Zenas, a small portion of his heart simply couldn't. Where was Jatsi? They may have just left her, large with expecting. It gnawed at Lemuel every time he thought of it. He would have found her, rescued her, cared for her and the baby, raised up Perrin's grandson to be the greatest soldier the army had ever seen. Perrin Shin's legacy could have been Lemuel's legacy. It still could be. She could still be out there, held captive by the garters who were waiting for the opportune moment to demand a ransom for her and her son. His son. I asked you a question, Captain. Captain Thorne blinked out of his private musings and met the glare of Genève. He didn't have a ready answer. Then again, since when did Genève require the truth? I accept your truth, sir. See that you do. Genev cleared his throat and glanced to the door to see the surgeon's assistant coming in. When the young man recognized Genev, he paused, as everyone did in the presence of the administrator, before continuing to the captain. Sir, the surgeon has a new salve to try on your arm. With your permission, I'll remove your jacket. Absurd, Genev announced. Why all of you try to pretend that nothing is completely wrong here? Lemuel stared at him and the irony of his statement. He turned to the assistant. Yes, take off my jacket. Can't even dress and undress yourself, Genev snickered. In any other profession, you would have been kicked out as useless. But the army of Idemia still sees you as valuable for some reason. After 4 weeks, I still fail to see why. Maybe someday you'll prove yourself of worth. So, Captain, are you requesting to remain in Edge, to ignore your father's insistence that you serve under him? I'm staying in Edge, Thorne said, as he struggled to get out of his jacket with as little help as possible. You are to request it of me, Captain, Genev snapped. I decide who stays and who goes. You are not the commander, nor will you be for a very long time. Is that understood, soldier? Yes, sir, Thorne responded tonelessly. Sir, may I continue to serve at Fort Shin, sir? Genev stood at his full, squat height. With a thin smile, he said, Yes, of course, Captain Thorne. You are, after all, my favorite officer. I will send a message to High General Thorne myself, telling him how important you are to Fort Shin. He nodded curtly and strode out of the surgery. The assistant applying the salve sighed in relief, but immediately tensed up when he noticed Thorne watching him. Sorry, sir. Thorne nodded once and grimaced as he watched the assistant apply the sweet-smelling concoction to the charred and shriveling flesh of his arm. He would keep that arm, to remember what he was and what he was about to become. Yes, he would become the most impressive soldier in the army, and with only one good arm. And it wouldn't be because of High General Thorne's leadership or Commandant Genev's guidance. Lemuel Thorne would become the greatest officer the world had ever seen by his own making. And when that time came, Commandant Genev would be a disgusting corpse rotting in the forest. A few weeks later, Deckett Brighter stood in front of their congregation on Holy Day. In his arms was his little girl, dressed in a simple white gown, to announce to everyone her name and to ask the Creator to bless her. He tried not to be nervous as hundreds of eyes gazed adoringly at the young new father, cradling his tiny baby with black hair that stood straight up. But it wasn't the pressure of so many people that worried him, nor was it even the fact that he'd never prayed out loud in front of so many people before, even though Rector Bustani had given him suggestions, and he'd heard a few other fathers publicly ask blessings for their newborn since they'd arrived in Salem. He wasn't even trembling because his wife stood by his side, or that he'd asked his father-in-law to stand with him as well, not so much as a distraction, but as a backup. No, what concerned Deck the most was that Salima would start wailing again, as she was prone to do when she was on display. He wasn't sure if it was because she was feeling exposed and open, as he did right then, or if she was hollering so that everyone would hear her, which Deck suspected was a Shin family trait, but he'd never admit that in front of anyone. Right now, he had the swaying and bouncing down pretty well, but only Perrin seemed to be able to master the Hidfadhi pat. They discovered that technique when Salima was a week old, and Jothran and Azra Hidfadhi came to visit them. As soon as the front door opened, somehow Salima knew, and she began to exercise her lungs. Jatsi looked at the Hidfadhis apologetically. Still trying to figure her out, she said. I just changed her, and I fed her half an hour ago, but we can't calm her down. But Azra took Salima and said, Don't apologize, and don't let anyone try to tell you newborns are easy. Most are not. She bounced Salima gently up and down. I'm guessing a gas bubble is lodged, and this poor girl doesn't know what to do with it. When you consider that she's a full-grown spirit crammed into a tiny body, and she's been working it for such a short time, and she can't quite remember anymore where she came from and what she's supposed to be doing now, it's no wonder she's confused by all these new sensations. Wouldn't you feel like wailing a few hours each day in her situation? I never thought of it that way before, Jatsi said. I guess I would. A moment later, Salima released gas from both ends and relaxed slightly in Asrar's arms. It's just so exhausting, isn't it, Salima? Asrar crooned as if the now quiet baby could understand her every word. I think some of us come to this world more anxious to get on with things than others. Some folks are fine with enjoying this time as a baby, but not you. You have so many plans, don't you? And you want to do them all right now, yet you can't even hold up your head. You're not even sure what I'm saying either, but you want so much to respond. It will all come in time, little one. One day, one step at a time. You'll get it all sorted out, so be patient with yourself. Salima stared at her as if she did understand, while Dek and Jatsi watched in wonder. Yes, she looks exhausted now, Jothan observed. May I? And he lifted Salima from Asrar. And now, little one, would you like to take a nap? Every day you get bigger and stronger, and napping helps. So, nap time? Jatsi leaned over to Dek and whispered, I wouldn't be surprised if she answered him. Jothan fitted the tiny baby on his shoulder, allowing her to snuggle into his thick neck. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if waiting for something, and then he started patting. But not any timid, soft patting. He clapped his hands so loudly on Salima's back that Jatsi couldn't help but lunge forward. Oh, she began, but recognizing that the Hidfadhis had some gift with newborns, she held herself back and said instead, That's rather hard, don't you think? Dek had gone to the other side of Jothan to see his daughter's face. Apparently not. Her eyes are closing. My grandfather Tuma discovered this, Jothan said, and I understand he once quieted your brother Pato to sleep when he was in Edge for the afternoon to meet Perrin and Mari. Babies don't need tiny, useless pats. They need to really feel that pat through their whole body. Jothan's voice was deep and soothing, yet he fairly rumbled as he said quietly, Don't worry, I'm not leaving bruises, and her back won't even be red. First, feel the rhythm of the infant, such as her heartbeat or her wailing. Then match your patting to her rhythm. She needs to feel peaceful consistency, to feel the harmony in the world she's now living in. She needs grounding. Dek didn't understand most of that, but somehow it worked. She's falling asleep, he whispered in astonishment. Jothan, can you please come over every night? He smiled as Salima released a shudder and a sigh. If you're absolutely desperate, of course I will. But how about I just teach you the technique instead? So after they laid Salima down for a nap, Jothan made Dek feel completely ridiculous by patting him on the back in the same manner, then making Dek pat him on the back to judge the force and try to find Jothan's rhythm while Dek pretended he could. By this time, Perrin had come over, and soon the three men were patting each other on the backs, while Jatsi and Asrar giggled and guessed who would burp first. While Jatsi did better with it, Dek almost had the technique down, but he was sure his daughter could feel his hesitancy whenever he took her in his arms. Occasionally, neither of them could calm her down. But she always settled right down whenever Perrin took her, and started what Mari called the Hidfadhi beatings. She wasn't too sure about the force either, but she couldn't dispute the results as soon as Salima fell asleep, as deeply as Pato had so many years ago. Dec decided that Salima just liked massively built men. She'd likely marry one in 20 years. No matter the time of day, Perrin was willing, and quite often would say, "I'll just keep her for now. I can work and cradle a baby at the same time. Come by again after you two have dozed." That's why Perrin stood near Dec, smiling proudly yet keeping his hands behind his back, because for now little Salima was silent, bright-eyed and watching the crowd that beamed back at her. And for once, Dec was feeling confident in his ability to be a father. After the congregation awed appropriately at Jatesy's explanation that they wanted Salem in their firstborn's name, Dec bowed his head and offered a prayer, thanking the Creator for their new baby and asking for blessings on her life. He wasn't sure what he said because he tried to follow Shem's advice, who had told him that he wasn't so much asking for blessings, but receiving hints from the Creator as to this child's potential. It was his right as patriarch to be inspired to know how they should raise their child, and to have glimpses into who she already was. That morning Dec had asked Shem, couldn't Perrin do it? He's a patriarch, right? And he certainly knows how to listen to the Creator. Shem had bobbed his head and said, well, yes, grandfathers can do it, but Dec, you listen just as well as he does. So, filled with anxiety, he tried his best to say the words that came to his mind and not substitute his own ideas. Finally, he ended the longest prayer he'd ever said out loud. His shaking didn't subside until they sat down again with the family, and Perrin put an arm around his shoulders. "Well done, Decet Brighter," he whispered. "I know Mari took notes as to what you said, but one thing stood out at me." "What was that?" Dec whispered. "That you blessed her with a boisterous spirit." "Did I really?" "Yes, and I'm sorry if you heard my response to that." "You responded?" "I couldn't help it. I accidentally whispered, 'Oh no.'" Even though Perrin chuckled quietly, Dec didn't know whether to join him or begin shaking again. Still in his arms, his little girl looked up at him with her big gray eyes, turning light brown. They weren't drifting and hazy, but fixed on him intently. An idea was shared between his eyes and hers, and the message was, the first of many. He began to tremble again. And that's the end of the chapter. Thank you.